We may as well move on then to a film which we have both seen. Yes. I will talk briefly about Host. I will say this for global pandemics, Scott. They seem to inspire opportunistic marketing and creativity in equal measure. We'd all just about come to terms with the idea of lockdown, I think, at the point which Netflix were busy capitalising on the rights to Contagion, and around the same time, a young filmmaker named Rob Savage played a Zoom video call prank on his friends that ended up becoming an online sensation. In that video, Savage complains of hearing footsteps in the attic above him, which his friends insist he investigate. One jump scare and a few million views later, Savage was knocking at the door of Shudder, AMC's subscription horror service, with a pitch to make the thing a feature. If nothing else, I admire his audacity. I like nothing more than a good horror film, although I'm not particularly a fan of the genre at large. And the problem is that 98 to 99% of all horror films are quantifiably insufferable garbage. What I do appreciate about the genre is that it has proven itself a fertile ground upon which many directors have earned their stripes, encouraging as it does creativity, inventiveness, and fiscal prudence. Particularly true in this age of the omnipresent high-quality video camera in your pocket, almost anyone can make a horror film, but that's a double-edged sword where one side is markedly more honed and sharper than the other. In Host, a group of friends, coordinated by a young woman named Hayley, meet online over a Zoom call to conduct a séance with a psychic named Salen. One of the group, who takes this all about as seriously as I, Scott or Drew probably would, plays a prank on the group that backfires spectacularly, releasing a murderous rogue spirit. Joke's on you, rational people. The best thing about Host is its perfectly timed opportunism. With a literally captive global audience who were forced to acquaint themselves with the plot's key mechanic pretty much overnight, this is very much a case of striking while the iron is red hot. Now, the film does not really avoid the tropes of the genre, and much of what happens here will be familiar to anyone who has seen the likes of Paranormal Activity in its ilk, though there is one nice instance which plays on the video background feature of conferencing software. For the most part, the action relies on jump scares, and while we've rounded on those in the past, these are at least mostly effective. The reason I'm not going to completely unload on Host, however, is that I will allow most premises at least a finite amount of my attention, which brings us to the second best thing, the running time. At a shade under 1 hour, Host may not have set my world alight, but it did at least respect my time. We've spoken a lot recently about movies outstaying their welcome, and that at least is one criticism it would be churlish to level here. Is this movie ever going to trouble the ranks of the few great horror movies? No. Did I find myself glancing at my watch? Also no. Host is by no means the first horror movie to address the information age of increasingly isolated online relationships. 2014's Unfriended and 2018's Searching are both notable examples of directors who got there first. What this movie does do well is to understand the limitations of its chosen medium and leverage that into something which is familiar enough to appeal to fans of the genre and individual enough to stand out. Ultimately, I am never going to watch this movie ever again, which sounds like a put down, but I would temper that by saying that in no way, shape or form do I grudge Host its time with me. I would also add, Scott, before I ask you for comment, that I watched this in the most optimal way possible, which was on a laptop, and it's one of the few films where I make a case for doing that.
Yes, well, my pulse certainly quickened while I was watching Host, but that's because I was watching it on an iPad while working out on an exercise bike. So whether that's related to the content or not, I don't know. Yes, I didn't mind it. I think in terms of the quality of Host, I don't think I've got a great deal to add to what you've said there. It's fine because it's not long enough to get annoying. I think it worked better as that Zoom tweet prank in instance, because I went and watched that afterwards, and I think it probably worked better as that one sort of jump scare gag, because basically that's all it's got. But yeah, that's all it's got, at least in terms of the horror axis of it. But I mean, to be fair, I didn't mind watching these characters. None of them were particularly annoying. They all felt reasonably realistic. I thought like it did, for better or worse, feel like a Zoom call between a group of friends. So it does do what it's trying to set out to do pretty well. I think when it gets to the actual scares, yes, it's doesn't have anything new to show you. It's just a different way to package up a found footage film. So it's basically the Blair Witch Project, but in a series of Zoom windows rather than as one videotape unspooling. So it's not really all that innovative, but in terms of just capturing the zeitgeist, there's not been very many better examples of something like that, along capitalising on what we're all going through. So, but yeah, I can certainly respect it on that axis.
I think it'll remain an interesting document, and I agree with you wholeheartedly about the actual characters. I went in expecting to find these people insufferable, because there is, without fail, there is nothing worse than actors in cheap movies, actors who are clearly at a level of will work for food, trying to act in a naturalistic fashion, because it almost never works. But these guys largely avoided that, so kudos to them.
Yes, even the... I guess this is one film that has a token guy in it, and he was quite entertaining, particularly because he's the most foul-mouthed of them all, which I always appreciate in any kind of work of entertainment.
And remarkably, yes, it passes the Bechdel test.
Oh yes, quite easily.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know if it gets points off for killing them all, but they're at least there.
Swings and roundabouts.
Yes. As further homework, I thought I'd have another look at some films that this kind of draws inspiration from. I did actually watch one of the Unfriended films, the later Dark Web, which was...
My God, man, what's come over you?
Was very much not a good use of my time, and I would recommend against that. Host was much better than that. But if you do want something that's sort of similarly themed, at least in terms of the kind of COVID lockdown kind of thing, the BBC put out a 6-part series of like 10-minute episodes-ish called Staged, which is between... Well, nominally it's supposed to be David Tennant and Michael Sheen rehearsing a play they couldn't get to because of lockdown and all that stuff. But yeah, it is just a comedy study into these guys' relationships devolving and their egos falling apart under the course of talking to each other. And it's pretty funny. I'm not the world's biggest David Tennant fan, but of course Michael Sheen is a national treasure. And when you put them together, it turns out they're both very funny. And it's a good little show taking on lockdown from a different axis. And I probably would recommend that over this. If you add all that together, it's probably about an hour by itself on the iPlayer. So yeah, I think it's worth making time for both of them. Actually, I think I would almost recommend Toast. If you want if you're in the market for any kind of horror film, you want something that's a bit more dialed into the times we are. Host is as good a horror film as I've seen in a long time, which is not necessarily a great recommendation. I've not seen many good ones, but this was one of the least offensive ones in all that time. So yeah, it's certainly not a classic for the ages, as you say, as anything other than a little document of this current time that we're living in. But yeah, as part of that, it's worth giving it an hour of your time. I think it wasn't that bad.
I think it's a great advert for why most horror films should be under an hour, because make no mistake about it, Host is a crap 1 hour 40 movie.
Yes.
And it does exactly what all other 1 hour 40 horror movies ought to do, which is just cut all the crap out.
Yes.
And if nothing else, it demonstrates the fact that, okay, it might not end up being Citizen Kane, but at least I won't actively detest it. Because, as I say, I will give most things an hour of my time before sort of, impatiently tapping my feet and checking my watch. So, yeah, kudos for that. Here's someone who understands the limitations of what they're working with and for once does not try to stretch it out purely for the sake of it.
Yes, and appreciates that most horror films are not, in fact, works where we're able to critique humanity's foibles in much a way other than just scaring them. So, yes.